Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the opening of the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture 2022. I'm Melinda Crane, and on behalf of our host, Germany's Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, in cooperation with the Berlin Senate and Messe Berlin, it is my pleasure to accompany you today as moderator. No matter what time zone you're joining us from, it is great to have you with us. We wish we could have met in person, as in pre-pandemic times, but to keep everyone healthy and safe, we have moved to this virtual format. The GFFA, nonetheless, remains as comprehensive as ever. Today, we kick off 5 days of outstanding panels and discussions, including a science slam, innovation pitches, a young farmers forum, and a high-level ministerial, all dedicated to a topic that could not be more timely nor more crucial. Sustainable land use, food security starts with the soil. As our opening film pointed out, soils are of central importance to feeding a rapidly growing global population, to meeting our climate goals, and to ensuring sustainable development for all. And yet, this critical resource is under pressure as never before, and throughout the world. Today, and during the entire GFFA, we want to talk about solutions. This forum brings together an impressive array of key international actors from politics, business, science, and civil society. So where better to spark engagement and exchange across sectoral and geographical boundaries? That's our aim, and we begin now with words of welcome from our host, Germany's Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister of Food and Agriculture, Dr. Ophelia Nick. Welcome.
Thank you. Sehr geehrte
ladies and gentlemen, ministers, state secretaries, excellencies, State Secretary Kamrat, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I am delighted to welcome you today to the 14th Global Forum for Food and Agriculture, the GFFA, from Berlin. My name is Ophelia Nick, and since December I have been serving as the Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister for Food and Agriculture. And I grew up with close ties to agriculture. The topic of global food supply is very close to my heart. Over the next 5 days, it will be all about this topic, the role of soils and for food security. In order to address the question of how we can produce sufficient food for a growing world population within the planet's boundaries, that is what we want to do. Unfortunately, I very much regret that we have to have this format once more virtually, but it gives us at least the opportunity to reach even more people globally. After all, that's what it is all about. The GFFA is the largest agricultural policy platform worldwide, and it wants to reunite as many people as possible. Together, we want to find global strategies for the challenges we face in the triad of food, agriculture, and climate. That is why I'm glad that so many of you are here today. Ladies and gentlemen, without soils, the only thing that grows is hunger. After all, soils are, just like water and air, one of the most valuable resources for producing foodstuffs. More than 90% of the global food production depend on soils. And soils are also the most important terrestrial carbon sink on Earth, if it is managed sustainably. And it can also, therefore, be a powerful steering tool for limiting global warming and for tackling the climate crisis. At the same time, our soils face enormous pressure globally. Climate change leads to flooded coastal areas and desertification. Droughts and floods lead to water and wind erosion, and the loss of soil biodiversity has a negative impact on soil health and soil fertility. Due to the improper use of soil, the soil quality deteriorates and the productive capacity is reduced. At the same time, there is more sealing of arable land due to urbanization, growing industry and infrastructure. And finally, many regions of our world lack still a fair and reliable access to agricultural areas. And on top of that, the quality of soils is decreasing and deteriorating increasingly, and fertile land is becoming more scarce. At the same time, there is a growing need of the growing world population for food, feed, and also for renewable raw materials. So if we want to achieve the right to food and food sovereignty by 2030, and if we want to seize the potential of our soils to mitigate climate change, then we must act now. So let us therefore find solutions together for the most urgent questions over the next 5 days. How can we improve soil protection? How can we restore degraded soils? How can we make the use of finite land resources more sustainable? And how can farmers worldwide get fair access to land? We set up the framework for that. We have 20 panels and 120 speakers from 120 different nations. And then there is the Agricultural Ministers Conference that brings roughly 70 agriculture ministers, as well as heads of international organizations, to the virtual table. It is up to all of us to find and develop practical, site-adapted solutions together. Soil is life. It is our responsibility. Use the virtual setup of the conference, exchange views with others. And now I am delighted to kick off this 14th Global Forum for Food and Agriculture 2022 together with you. Ladies and gentlemen, before handing over to State Secretary Kamrat from the Federal State of Berlin, I want to thank the Federal State of Berlin and the Messe Berlin for hosting this GFFA this year once more, despite the challenging conditions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Nick, and we will take your impressions with us.
Secretary Nick. And ladies and gentlemen, the GFFA meets today for the 14th time. Past themes have ranged from food security, climate change, to the future of livestock, feeding burgeoning cities, digitalization, and, not surprisingly, the implications of the pandemic on food supply and demand. For the city of Berlin, as Germany's internationally oriented capital and as a hub for tech innovation, the GFFA takes high priority. Let's hear more now from the State Secretary in the Berlin Senate Department for Environment, Mobility, Consumer and Climate Protection, Markus Kamrat. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Many thanks. Sehr geehrte Exzellenzen, sehr geehrte
Excellencies, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, State Secretary Ophelia Nick, many thanks for the kind introduction and a warm welcome. In this beautiful city, I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the Federal State of Berlin to the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture. You are missing out. For the second time, this conference takes place only virtually. But we can also see virtual formats cannot replace personal encounters entirely, but we can have good discussions nonetheless. My name is Markus Kamrat. I am Berlin State Secretary in charge of agriculture. We may not be a big federal state, but the topic is of utmost importance to us. The value of the resource of soils is, of course, very present in a densely populated urban area. We are a metropolis of millions of inhabitants, so we are aware of this fact. We can have an impact in our construction and infrastructure policy, but also with our consumer and food policy. This can have an impact on the intensity of land use. After all, this is the topic of this year's GFFA. Sustainable land use, food security starts with the soil. And this topic can and must be looked at from different angles. We therefore focus on questions of soil protection, regeneration of degraded soils, the sustainable use of the very finite resource that is soils, and a fair access for farmers. The need for action is clear. Up to 50% of fertile soils of our planet have been lost over the past 150 years. Sustainable land use is the key to food security, locally and globally. Scarcity of the resource of soil is a driver for prices in the agricultural economy in Germany and elsewhere. So this is a challenge for all of us. An agricultural sector that's fit for the future must work with nature, not against it. In future, wherever it is possible, we should have an agriculture that is climate-friendly, regional and based on the circular economy. Area-based agriculture with regional feed production, ecological cultivation methods, digital applications and new ideas for modern water management. All of these different approaches must be streamlined and combined. And, what is also key, a diverse agricultural sector can not only focus on markets. No, it must also focus on people who have a right to safe, healthy and sustainable foodstuffs. Sustainable land use is therefore both in the interest of the rural and the urban population. Berlin is a city whose representative I am today, and it is not mainly involved in the system for supporting sustainable land use. However, cities are often viewed as drivers for the competition for land by agriculture. They turn agricultural land into construction sites due to the urban sprawl. But cities also play a key role because they create a demand for agricultural products. They therefore have a great responsibility for handling food. For Berlin, we can also add, ever more people are opting very consciously for foodstuffs that haven't been transported around the globe and that reach our plates directly. In order to address this growing demand of consumers, we need to build up regional and sustainable value chains. The surrounding state of Brandenburg has already started to support young farmers and building up processing structures to see to that. In the German capital, we are ensuring a reliable demand, for example, for school catering, so all children can receive an environmentally friendly and healthy meal. This is our contribution to sustainable agriculture. It is up to all of us to conduct joint research, to test and try new innovations, model projects and approaches. We need to act in solidarity and exchange knowledge on sustainable land use on all continents. The GFFA is a key forum for this exchange, so I wish you all an insightful conference and many insightful events, many new ideas and food for thought, and of course the best of success and motivation for implementing these ideas, because we need you all. And I want to conclude by adding wishes that are important in this time particular. Stay healthy, and thank you.
My pleasure.
And ladies and gentlemen, as we've heard from our hosts, the threats to soils are manifold, with disastrous consequences for farmers and for food supply. If we're serious about realizing the UN goal of a world without hunger by 2030, we must act now. And the goals are clear: improving soil protection, restoring degraded soils, promoting sustainable use of finite land resources, and supporting fair access to land for farmers. What initiatives and measures can help us attain these aims? We have an eminent panel of speakers with us to address that question and more. And ladies and gentlemen, before I introduce our panel, let me just say that we are also very eager to hear from you, because we want this to be a forum in substance as well as in name. If you have registered for the event and are watching this live stream on the GFFA platform, then you can send us your questions or short comments on the chat function of the live stream. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers. And in order to maximize our time for discussion, I am going to keep the introduction short and refer everybody to our website for more details on the impressive vitas of our guests. And I'll begin with Her Excellency Tina Beampilly. She is Deputy Executive Secretary of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. She formerly served as Executive Secretary of the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer and as Greece's Environment Minister. A very warm welcome to you, Madam. It's also great to have with us Attain Lal. He is Distinguished University Professor at Ohio State University in the United States, and he heads its CFAES Attain Lal Center for Carbon Management and Sequestration. A widely published expert on soil health and restoration, he has also served as soil physicist at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture in Nigeria. Welcome, and thank you for joining us at a very early hour, your time in the US. It's also great to have with us Christiane Lomber. She is president of the Committee of Professional Agricultural Organizations, COPA, the European Farmers Association. She also presides over the French Fédération Nationale des Syndicats d'Exploitants Agricoles, the French Agricultural Union, and is the first woman to do so. And we are seeing her in a still photo here because the internet connection was not quite as good as we hoped. We are very, very happy to have you with us, Madam. And finally, it's a pleasure to introduce Cristina Timponi-Cambiaghi. She's Senior Global Policy and Advocacy Specialist at the International Land Coalition. From 2011 to 2015, she held high-ranking positions with the Brazilian government, including heading the International Affairs Unit of the Ministry of Agrarian Development and the Secretariat for Human Rights of the Presidency of Brazil. Thank you so much for being with us. And dear speakers, as you know, we have quite a compact window for discussion. So just from me, a kindly reminder to ask you to be concise with your answers, meaning to stay within the allotted time of 2 to 3 minutes, if you would. And also, we're very eager to hear a focus on solutions, including your own concrete examples and personal insights based on experience. And now, let's begin with an overview. And I'd like to ask all of you to tell us, first of all, what for you would be the key #1 priority for better protecting soils under pressure and also for restoring degraded soils, the absolute top priority. I'll begin with Madam Beampilly, if I may.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and thank you very much for hosting us. As you know, we are based in Bonn, and I would like to thank most of all our host country for having us here. Now, the absolute priority for us as a convention to combat land desertification would be for our countries and parties to ensure that the voluntary targets that they have set for restoring land by 2030 are being implemented in practice. I think we need to go, although these are voluntary targets, we need to go for voluntary objectives to specific implementation. So for us at the global level, this would have been priority 1.
Thank you very much. And I'll put the same question to Professor Lal, if I may. Your absolute top priority for restoring and protecting soils.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. The topmost priority is translating science into we have information somehow at the local level, at the regional level, at national level, international level, with a strong need to implement the program. convert our words, our slogan into real action, action which are pro-farmer, pro-agriculture, pro-nature. That is what's lacking.
Thank you very much, and we will dig deeper on that in just a moment. Let me go now to Madame Lomber. Again, the same question to you. Your top priority for protecting and restoring soils under pressure.
Merci beaucoup, merci pour l'invitation. La priorité, c'est une définition de la qualité.
Thank you very much for the invitation. The priority is the definition of the quality of soils, that is scientific references to be able to protect the flaws so that the farmers know what they have to do. This scientific reference needs to be disseminated so that farmers are informed, and we also need voluntary initiatives. In France, we have lots of voluntary initiatives. We have a lot of initiatives to restore the soils, to protect them from erosion, for instance, intercropping. Farmers have already made some changes, and we would like to promote voluntary measures, some of which need to be adapted to regional conditions. And we do not favor a top-down approach, but we favor adapted solutions. We have the 4 per mill initiative, which provides answers to these initiatives. This means that we have to try to reconcile food protection with the protection and conservation of soils, because this is essential for food production and for the income generation for farmers. The awareness is already there, but now we need to support farmers with massive measures to achieve specific results. Thank you very much.
Madame Campiaghi, and essentially the same question, but with a somewhat wider focus. What, for you, would be the key priority for ensuring fair and sustainable use of increasingly finite land?
Thank you so much, Melinda, for the question, and thank you for inviting us to be here today. As International Land Coalition, we are a coalition of more than 300 organizations that work together for putting people in the center of land governance. So my question to your my answer to your question is, of course, the solution for having and guaranteeing sustainable land use is putting people in the center of decisions. So this, some people would call this a human rights based approach. We call people-centered land governance, but we defend with our members that if people are not seen as subjects of rights, they cannot play their role of taking good care of their lands. And of course, the basic question we always do, if you live in a rented house, for example, would you take as good care as if this house was yours? So securing land tenure for the people that live on the land and from the land is fundamental for guaranteeing the sustainable land use, and of course also guaranteeing the good and preservation and the quality of soils. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and we'll return in a moment to talk about how we put people at the center. Let me go back now to Professor Lal, if I may. And you told us we need essentially to follow the science, and you are perhaps the leading soil scientist in the world. You have said that the biggest challenge, in your view, is mindset. There's a need, and I'm quoting here, there is a need to change our values and our thinking with regards to the importance of soil and the environment. Now, you yourself have done a great deal to address that challenge with your many published works. Do you have the impression your message is being heard?
Some of it is. Your program today obviously is an indication that the message is being heard. But I was also disappointed. UN Food Systems Summit, for example, the final Executive Secretary's report, the world soil was missing. And that indicates that the message was not heard. COP26, Glasgow, the world soil and world agriculture both are missing in the final report. Therefore, we are missing something. And that message has to go very clear. And that clear is the policies. 4 per 1,000 program, I heard colleagues from France. Yes, it's a very important idea, but its actual translated into action at local level is not there. We talk about soil's health and soil protection. We forget that the One Health concept, the health of soil, plants, animal, people, environment, and the planet is one and indivisible. COVID-19 is one of the examples. We have farmers, 70% in developing countries, poor women farmer, they do not have access to the scientific knowledge. Yeah. We provide subsidy, but we do not pay farmer for ecosystem services that lead to soil protection, soil restoration, water quality. I'm afraid we are not soil-centric. Yes, people-centric is important, but we must be first soil-centric. If soil is lost, everything is lost. And that policy translation, as indicated by 2 recent UN System Summit, is somewhat disappointing.
Thank you very much. A very quick follow-up question, if I may. Science, of course, begins with data, with evidence, and you mentioned the lack of information for many farmers, particularly small farmers in the Global South. How can we do better at getting them the information that they need?
Yes, that's a very good point. If we do not understand the scientific properties and processes, and that is the case in many smallholders, which are 570 million of them, 70% of those are women farmers that need help. We need to help them understand soil properties and processes under modern system of management. How can we enhance, how can we restore the word that you used, the degraded soil? What are the critical limit of soil organic carbon content, below which even the use efficiency of inputs, if they are made available, is not good. Even when the improved varieties are adopted, they cannot respond. So that local scientific information data bank must be improved. But then at a higher level, at a policy level, farmer must be rewarded for sequestering carbon, for restoring soil, for protecting nature, for being pro-nature. Mm-hmm. That is not a subsidy. Sometimes it's confused with subsidy. It's a payment for ecosystems.
And I want to come back to that point as well. But let me go now to Deputy Executive Secretary Beampilly, and feel free to speak to the point about that important UN document leaving out the word soil. But beyond that, Madame Beampilly, let me ask you this. Nearly 1/5 of the world's farmers are already struggling to cultivate degraded agricultural land. You recently pointed out that over 33% of Earth's soils are already degraded, and that number can rise to 90% by 2050. How do we stop that trend? And what role does the UN Convention on Combating Desertification play?
Thank you so much. 2 very quick comments to what Professor Lal said, with whom I absolutely agree. And I think what he raised is an issue of governance mostly. I think we are really focusing on very sectorial approaches, and what I really feel that we will take from a forum like that, like the one that that Germany has organized today, that the federal government has organized, is to bring all these different sectors together. So when we talk about food and agriculture, we don't talk about land, we talk about soil. When we go to the climate COP, we don't talk about climate and air and water, we talk about soil as well. When we go to biodiversity, we talk about soil as well. I think this is a very big challenge that we have, not only at the governance level, but also on the science level. I think sometimes even science is a bit sectorial because it addresses issues and challenges that are happening in a specific convention. So just to wrap up, I would like to agree with Professor Lal that soil is the link between land degradation, between biodiversity loss and climate change. And we definitely need to ensure that this is referenced everywhere. Now, on your point, Melinda, what you mentioned at some point that we need to get to the farmers at the local level the information that they need. I would also reverse that. And I think what is important for us when we talk about a convention that deals with global issues, it's very important to find a way to receive these messages from the local level to the global level. Because there are some local practices that are regarding regenerative agriculture that we need to find a way to share these examples and to also scale them up. So this issue of communication and information sharing is mutual. Now, regarding to your own specific question, I would like to give a very specific example. We are having our Conference of the Parties this year in Côte d'Ivoire. And one of the big issues that we are discussing with the government of Côte d'Ivoire has to do with the cocoa value chain that they have in Côte d'Ivoire. And we asked them, how can we be relevant? The parties, 197 parties will come there, we'll discuss issues, then we will leave, and we want to have an impact on the ground. So together with the government, we are trying to have a legacy program on the cocoa. And basically, it addresses three issues, which are the three issues that we will be discussing at a global level. How we mitigate, so how we mitigate existing value chains to become more resilient, how we adapt, how, for example, we introduce new value chains that survive climate change, and Côte d'Ivoire will be a hotspot for climate change in the future, and how we build back better, how we ensure that the value chains have value, they add to the growth and the development of the country through different traceability elements. So what I want to say is that these issues are going to be discussed at a global level, but we are trying with specific programs on the ground where the government will have to implement them to have a bit of a local and national impact.
And I want to come back to exactly that point, how we link up those levels a little bit later on. Let me go now to Christiane Lomber. And Madame, farmers, of course, face very high expectations. They're supposed to produce sufficient quantities of healthy food at affordable prices under sometimes volatile trading conditions, and at the same time, protect the environment and resources like soil. Is this even doable, or are we demanding the impossible from farmers today?
Merci. En réaction à ce qu'a dit le professeur, je voudrais dire qu'effectivement,
First of all, I want to respond to what was said by Professor Lal. I think the situation is actually very different depending on the continent we're on.
70 millions de petits agriculteurs qui sont majoritairement des femmes. Je représente le syndicat européen et je suis agricultrice en France. Je peux vous dire que en France et en Europe, nous avons cette pleine conscience de la nécessité de protéger les sols, et ceci depuis une vingtaine d'années. Peut-être ça a été moins le cas auparavant, mais aujourd'hui, la prise de conscience est réelle. Alors oui, l'équation est compliquée.
Earlier, but now it seems to be clear. It is, of course, difficult for farmers because they must produce food and at the same time comply with certain requirements regarding climate change mitigation or the environment. The European Green Deal, as has been published, also addresses farmers. Then we have the Farm to Fork strategy, the Biodiversity Strategy 2030. And also the soil initiative, which is being prepared. So there are ever new requirements for producing foods, and farmers also have to face climate change, floods, frozen soils, droughts, heat waves, and the like. All of this has massive impacts on soils too. Of course, this is sometimes counter to good practices. The best soil is also being damaged and good quality is lost. We are doing a lot in order to have or promote certain cultivation, but if there are extreme climate and weather events which become more frequent, then this is harmful to our initiatives. In the Common Agricultural Policy, which is now new, the member states are about to draft national strategic plans and ecosystems which also take soil conservation into account. So there is an awareness, clearly. And for France, I could also add that there are different seminars and events that have been organized in France. So there is an awareness in France regarding the link between animal and human health as well as soil health. We have many organizations that work towards that goal regarding the safety of phytosanitary products. And we have seen outcomes regarding biodiversity too. We need farmers here as well. It takes time, of course, but we see first results already.
Mechanisms that can achieve those goals in a moment. Let me pose a similar question to Madame Cambiaghi, if I may. And as all of you have emphasized, biodiversity, climate change, and soil go hand in hand. Some scholars now say that about 50% of the world's land surface should remain in a natural state in order to ensure, essentially, that soils can play a role as a carbon sink. Is that politically and economically feasible in the face of the growing competition for land due to rising demand for food, as well as for bioresources for energy?
That's a tough question, Melinda, because for us that are people-centered, we are focusing on the people that live on the land and that depends on the land for their living. So I would say, of course, that I don't think it's feasible that 50% of the land would be out of any human pressure, but what I would say is that when we guarantee secure tenure rights for those people that depend on the land, their relationship with their land and environment changes. Now, of course, today we see a big inequality on land distribution that we thought it was being reduced with so many policies of international frameworks like the VGGTs, the notion of being responsible in the way we manage land. But our recent report that was launched last year on inequality, together with Oxfam, showed the contrary. Showed that the land concentration is increasing. And today we have 1% of farms in the world that operate more than 70% of the world's farmland. So I don't think it's an issue of a percentage of land that should be out of hands of man. It's how we are using the land. No, the fundamental problem is the use we are doing of the land, how we are managing the land, how much we are holding accountable donors, investors, big-scale farming systems, and how we've been using the land. I think that's the main question we should be putting to ourselves.
Thank you very much. Let's take a deeper dive on the nexus that all of you have been talking about between soil restoration and climate and biodiversity. And I'll come back to Professor Lal, if I may. You've estimated that the soils of the world have lost about 135 billion tons of carbon since the beginning of agriculture. And you've called efforts to sequester carbon in soils the most cost-effective way to mitigate global warming. So tell us, how can we boost such efforts? Who needs to act? What kind of incentives can and should be put into place? And I actually also have an audience question that's come in on a similar point, namely what you think about carbon compensation schemes for farmers, essentially recognizing their role as carbon sequesterers.
Thank you. Yes, soils of the world have lost somewhere about 130, 135 gigaton. And many soils have their carbon concentration in the root zone, 0.1%, 0.2%. It should be about 2%. Therefore, the productivity is poor. The quality of the food produced is poor. The rate at which the carbon can be sequestered in soil, 4 per mil program of the French government is a very good suggestion. It can be about 2 to 2.5 gigaton of carbon in all soils of the world if we manage them properly. But fossil fuel emission at the moment is 10 gigaton. So soil alone cannot offset the fossil fuel emission. So first we must control, find non-carbon fuel sources, emit no fossil fuel, and then restore carbon in soils and trees. Between 2020 and 2100, the technical potential of carbon sequestration in soils of the world is about 178 gigaton. Technical potential in the vegetation of the world is about 155 gigaton. Together, they have a capacity of drawdown of atmospheric CO2 of more than 155 parts per million. Therefore, if we find no carbon fuel sources, if we manage soil and vegetation properly, if we protect soil carbon stock, if we restore degraded soil, limiting global warming to 2 degrees centigrade is still possible. But for that, we must translate our slogan into action. Payment to farmer for ecosystem services. And I can come back to that, how much my suggestion is that the economic cost that farmers should receive is $30 to $35 per carbon credit, or 25 to 30 euro per carbon credit. That is not the farmers are being paid at the moment. Just very quick last point. Yes, 50% of the land must go back to nature. Humans are too greedy. 1/3 to 140% of all food produced reaches no stomach. That is equal to 4.4 million square kilometers of area. Why are we producing more and wasting more? Why are we throw waste society? We must stop control of our land use and return land back to nature, because we got many other million species that we have to share the land with them. Returning land to 50% back to land is the goal that we must meet by 2100.
Thank you very much for picking up on that point, Professor Lal. Let me come back now to carbon compensation schemes for farmers. And Madame Lomber, you have called an EU plan to support what's sometimes now being called carbon farming a good opportunity, but you also warned of challenges. What are those challenges and how can they be resolved?
Merci. Je voudrais dire en préambule deux choses.
One aspect I would like to say here as an introduction, we need to fight against the artificial setup of soils by spreading industrial areas. We use up a lot of soil with that, so we need to be a bit more careful regarding the use of soil for non-agricultural purposes. And secondly, yes, there is food waste due to different reasons. We know that these reasons are different depending on whether we are talking about the global north or south. So we need to instruct people in the north. And it is also about the storage and transport of products in other countries. Regarding the 50% of soils in a natural state, I don't think that that is necessary. We should use our soils, but not overuse them. There are cultivation and production methods which are sustainable. So in some areas in France, half of the agricultural area are good for biodiversity and for storing carbon. So there is to be a clear distinction. In Europe, there is a big program, carbon farming, and the French presidency currently has made this a priority. And farmers can use their cultivation methods to store carbon. So carbon is stored in soils. by using certain agricultural method. There is lower tillage and no carbon is set free. This is also a topic that FAO always puts on the agenda. Food security is key. We must produce food for all people. We must fight hunger. And there are hundreds of millions of people who suffer from hunger, and we need to fight climate change too. So from this point of view, I want to say carbon levels are not equal everywhere. So you mentioned the number of 35 euros per ton. China is talking about 1.5 euros. So it depends on where we are regarding the methods. And one more thought. We often talk about farm to fork, the Green Deal these days. And also the study that shows, the Wageningen University study, shows that we can produce less in Europe, but then we would import more from other countries, which would be a disaster for our carbon balance. Is that a serious proposal that we go to reduce production in Europe and then import products which Europeans need, for example, from countries that do not comply with these rules? So food security and rules for trade, all of that must be viewed together. Of course, we also want the World Trade Organization to take COP21 into account, because the combat against climate change and the fight for food security is a necessity. We need a global cross-cutting approach. We cannot just address one topic, but all of them at the same time.
Now to Deputy Executive Secretary Beampilly. And Madam, if land is the second largest reservoir of carbon, then restoring soils in one part of the world, basically picking up on what we've just heard, that we need to take a global and systemic approach. Restoring soils in one part of the world obviously has a profound impact for other regions, generating what economists call positive externalities. Yet we tend to view coping with desertification and drought as local responsibilities. So how do we change that, and how do we trigger investment on the scale that's needed?
Thank you, Melit. Two points first, just a response to one point that was raised by our two speakers that have taken the floor before. I think it's important, we agree that if we protect soil by using better farming practices and restore land, we can ease the pressure, and we can use soil as carbon sink, and we can ease the pressure also for climate change. But I think it's important here to understand that even if you take some sort of bites from the climate change discussion, we definitely need to reduce CO2 emissions. And I think this we need to always have it in perspective. The second point that I wanted to make is that it's not about producing less only, it's about consuming less. And I think sometimes we keep talking about production patterns, but production and consumption patterns are the two sides of the same coin. And I think one big issue that we have, at least in the developed countries, is food waste. Unless we tackle this, the meat-heavy diets, the food waste, we will never be able to tackle the problem that we are talking about. Now, coming to your question, I think there are two things. Land degradation, yes, and drought. Land degradation and drought are usually being seen as national or regional issues. I think this is one of the big challenges that we have in the Convention to combat desertification of land. We are trying to alleviate that. We are trying to talk about land degradation neutrality targets that all countries should come up with, although they are voluntary. And also we are trying to have a drought discussion that goes beyond the boundaries of every single country. These are two issues that are going to be discussed in our next COP, but I think that you have just hit the top of the nail, as we call it, when you say that the drought has been considered as a national issue. There are 4 things that we are trying to do. One is to engage and also engage the private sector in these discussions, because you cannot have enough money if you raise resources from funds or from the public sector. So we need to make sure that the private sector is part of the solution. We definitely need to empower the local communities. Unless we have people on the ground and people-centered solutions, we are not going to achieve our objective. To share information and good practices that happen in some countries that may be relevant to other countries. And finally, to scale up good solutions that are happening at a national or a regional level and scale it up to the global level. Just one thing before I close. For example, we have, as you may know, the Great Green Wall in Africa. It has been a very interesting and a very big project that spans from the West Coast to the East Coast in Africa. It's a very big initiative, and we hope that these initiatives, first of all, can be implemented, but secondly, can be replicated to other areas across the global South and the global North. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with an eye on the clock, I do want to move to a deeper dive on sustainable land use and fair access for farmers now, if I may. And almost 1 billion people across the world consider it probable or highly likely that they will be driven from their land or property in the next 5 years. 1 billion people across the world, 1 billion farmers. So obviously that lessens the incentive to adopt the kind of sustainable soil preservation and land use practices that we have been talking about. Let me ask Madame Cambiaghi, if I may, to talk a little bit more about what the people first strategy that you talked about in your opening answer, what that strategy means in practice. How do you move toward giving farmers the kind of secure tenure that they need in order to adopt practices that may only pay off in the longer term?
Thank you so much for this question. Well, first, I think it's important for us to have very clear what do we mean by sustainable land use. Who are those users and what kind of sustainability we are talking about? The sustainable approach can be related to the environment, can be related to social, to economical, political. In the case of our concept of people-centered land government, of course, we focus on the social sustainability and how much the wrong choices of managing land can affect the livelihoods of the people that live on the land and that depends on the land for their living. So we are not talking just about small farmers, family farmers, but we are also speaking about rural women, indigenous peoples, pastoralists, landless people, all the people that have their lives depending on land. So in our idea, what we defend is that the decisions that are made around the land use and the way you manage the land, what that land will be used for should involve the people that will be directly affected by those decisions. So the voluntary guidelines, I see that this week there will be a session that is also promoted by International Land Coalition and other partners on the implementation of the voluntary guidelines for responsible management of land. This is a CFS instrument. There is the defense of the idea that multi-stakeholder platforms should be adopted by governments where people have the same power decision and the same seat at the table to decide how the land will be managed and how that land will be used. This should engage governments, investors, private sector, and civil society, and of course, the people that live in the land. Those are the main affected by the decisions that are taken in the state level. And besides that, I would just to conclude to say that when you don't approach the inequality that we still face today around land distribution, I'm not just referring to property rights, I'm referring to the right that the people should have to have the sensation of insecurity reduced, of having the right of planning their lives, planning what they will grow in their lands. And this inequality affects many other aspects of the rights chain. It affects the way we face poverty. It affects how food insecurity is tackled. It affects climate change, affects also social conflicts. Mm-hmm. So just to respond and conclude your question, we need to look at the people as subjects of rights and to consider them in the decisions that are taken in the way we manage the land use. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Let me go to Professor Lal. And Professor, I know that you grew up on a small farm. So talk to us a little bit about how you believe that small landholders can be supported in adopting both better protection of soil and also sustainable land use practices. What do you see as crucial?
Thank you. Yes, there are 570 million small landholders, which are less than 2 hectares. They are also the ones who do not have resources to invest in soil protection and restoration. The Sustainable Development Goal number 1, end poverty. You cannot end poverty by compensating farmer for payment of carbon at 1.35 euro, that was mentioned. Undervaluing a resource is leading to tragedy of the common. And we must pay fair, just, and transparent price of societal value to farmer, especially small farmer. Otherwise, the Sustainable Development Goal number 1 and Goal number 2, end hunger, will never be met. Unfortunately, 8-9 years from now, that is going to be the case. I think the other part is how can people and nature both flourish? It's very important. They both flourish. If people flourish and nature suffers, that's no solution because people are part of nature. So they both must flourish. And for both of them flourishing, I salute UNCCD for their concept of land degradation neutrality. The land degradation neutrality is absolutely essential. 1/3 of all ice-free land is degraded. And that degradation can only happen if farmers are compensated for doing service to the society through restoring nature and soil. And that fair price is very, very critical, and smallholders are very important. Now, the other part I want to mention is soil refugees. We talk about refugees in the world, everywhere, obviously, 75, 80, 85, 90 million sometime on annual basis. There are soil refugees. Why? Soils are going extinct. Why? Soils are endangered. Why? Soils cannot support the people who live there. That is the problem. The people come first, but make sure nature supports people. If nature, which is soil, doesn't support people, it will not happen. My last point I want to mention about is the urban agriculture. We have mega cities, 37 of them with more than 10 million people. A city of 10 million people requires 6,000 tons of food per day. A city of 40 million people requires 4 times that. By 2100, the largest city in the world, Lagos, Nigeria, will be probably 95 million people. Certain amount of food, maybe 15, 20%, must be grown within the city limit by recycling the nutrients and water brought into the city. That is soil-less agriculture. Aquaculture, aquaponic, hydroponic, artificial soil, whatever. So our thinking has to change. We are too much people-centric. people and nature, they both must flourish. And then the last point I want to mention is respecting farmers, respecting the farming profession. Large farmer, small farmer, all farmers. Let me give you an example. A graduate taking my classes and graduating with a degree in soil science agronomy get barely $25,000 per year salary. A graduate in IT, a graduate in MBA, a graduate in medical gets several times more. Society does not respect the agriculture profession. It has to change its thinking. That's very important.
Thank you very much. And let me give Madame Lomber a chance to respond to that. Would you agree that our approach to farming, our respect for farmers is part of the problem? Madame Lomber?
On voit au travers de l'expression du professeur que les situations sont très différentes dans les pays.
What the professor just said shows that the situation is very different in developing countries where there are many small farmers, and in Europe where you also have family farms, and then in countries where there are many big enterprises, such as in Latin America or in the whole of America. So the differences are very big, but there are commonalities. You need to preserve soils, you need to reduce soil sealing, and we need an alliance between farmers and soils need to be protected. That needs to be generally recognized. Fair compensation for farmers is also very important, so that they can have enough money for their livelihoods and that they can live in dignity. And we also have the goal of zero hunger. And this also means that nutritional patterns have to change, and we need to change consumption, and we need to change our nutritional patterns. 1 kilo of beef is consumed in North and South America per week, and in Europe it's 300 grams, so the situation varies greatly. Of course, you can't regulate everything by government measures, and there is the possibility to compensate farmers for services they provide, for instance, carbon storage. And this carbon storage needs to be compensated by enterprises that are polluters. And the farmers can then sell the service they provide in storing carbon. So private players are also important, and we need to organize the compensation of these environmental services. We also need to address consumption and also displacement based on land conflicts. People are driven from their homes and from their lands. In France, we have a close cooperation with African farmers, and we have a problem of the lack of land registers. If you don't have a land register, you cannot define your property, your ownership of the land, and then it's hard for them to make long-term investments into the soil to protect and conserve them in the long term. That happens in Africa and also in South America. But to reassure you, in Europe we have carbon farming. We try to offset the negative effects. We try to reduce the negative impact on biodiversity and soil degradation. There are some NGOs saying that this doesn't go far enough and not fast enough, but if you work together with nature, you always have things that you can't control. The same happens with health issues. We have a major health crisis right now, and you can't always have an immediate answer every time. I've been a farmer for 40 years. I started farming at the age of 19, And the methods and practices have changed a lot since then. We are all aware now of environmental issues, and we try to address new approaches. We also have the awareness that we need to feed people, and we need to put a stronger focus on organic farming. But also, consumers need to change their consumption patterns. But you cannot ban Europeans from eating specific foods. You can't plan everything, and you can't impose everything on consumers. You need to raise the awareness among consumers.
And changing mindsets. So let us now leave it briefly for there, because we do have two young farmers with us today, and I would like to now bring them into the discussion. It is my great pleasure to welcome Lucera Leva, a young farmer from Mexico, and Crispin Monunga from Zimbabwe. And we were speaking during our discussion about smallholder farmers and the fact that many of these smallholder farmers, Lucy, are also women. And I know that gender equality is of enormous importance to you. So can you tell us, what are the biggest challenges that women in your country face when it comes to getting and holding access to land, which we were just talking about?
Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm happy to participate. Well, I am sure that sexism is the biggest challenge the rural women face to have access to land in Mexico. And this is increasing by the conditions of violence, insecurity, poverty, and hunger. This could make us think that rural women are having all against them. And who of these people could be worried about sustainability or soil protection if they are not even free to live? I can share with you that in the rural areas predominate ideas such as women are not strong, intelligent, or financially capable to get into agribusiness. Then it is necessary to change the way of thinking, of course, but also to convince those women that they can actually lead their own lives, and all this could be learned at schools. So we should facilitate access to education. 5th grade is the average level of education of rural women in Mexico. Certainly, agriculture is mostly led by men, but the number of women is larger than men's in activities like cropping, harvesting, and packaging. Of course, the lands are owned by men, but the effort, help, and hard work is done by their families too. And if we look harder in the rural areas of Mexico, there are not facilities of decent working or living conditions for women. And actually, many women are lonely since young age, raising families as a result of abandonment or mere immigration. So finally, and considering opinions from Mr. Lal and Mrs. Cambiaghi, as a woman, as mother, as a wife, and student and farmer, I firmly believe that the work is to facilitate opportunities of education for rural women that are already mothers and that already lead silently food production side by side with their husbands or by their own, and transform lands to strengthen their abilities and complement their knowledge in areas such as soil and food science, economics, machineries, food safety, and sustainability. Mm-hmm. That way, the develop of skills to face the cultural challenges of their society.
Thank you so much, Lucy Leva. And let me go to you, Crispin. And according to a World Bank study, farmers in many countries, including your own country, Zimbabwe, who have insecure land rights, often have trouble getting financing, getting credit. Can you share an example of that? And in your opinion, how can and should this be remedied?
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. So I think we are coming from a situation whereby previously in Zimbabwe, proper land rights, which farmers could use as collateral to borrow money from a lot of banking institutions. So fast forward the year 2000 when there was land reform program, whereby previous white-owned farms were now being repossessed or now being taken away by the government to give away to the people, to the black people. You would find out institutions now would shy farmers now to say they do not have collateral property for farmers so that they could uphold that collateral for them to get loans and financing. So you'd find a situation whereby farmers would get loans at very high interest rates as compared to previously where farmers could not actually be able to get loans at probably 3% interest rates over a period of 25 years or so. Right now, we're looking at a situation whereby farmers are getting short-term loans, whereby those loans are within a range of 60% interest rates for over a period of 1 year. So that is very unattainable for farmers. However, I would also like to see a situation whereby we are saying farmers not being able to finance their own farming practices. They are now faced to being beggars, or rather having to rely on government projects for them to sustain their farming environments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Crispin, also for sharing those insights. And I know both of you will be taking part in the GFFA Young Farmers Forum later on this week, and we wish you utmost success there and going forward. Thanks so much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for a few audience questions, and we definitely have some audience questions coming in. So let me pick up, first of all, on the point about access to credit and about financing. And I'll come, if I may, to Deputy Executive Secretary Beampilly with this question. And in fact, the UN has issued, the UN Committee on World Food Security has issued guidelines, principles for responsible agricultural investment. Can you tell us a little bit about what UNCCD is doing in conjunction with other UN agencies in order to promote adoption both of those principles and also of the voluntary guidelines for responsible governance of land tenure?
Yes, let me start by the second issue that you raised on land tenure, which was also raised by Christina and also by the two farmers that we had the privilege of listening to. The UNCCD back in the previous conference of the parties in India, the parties adopted a decision on land tenure. Now, it is a weak decision. We need to work with other UN entities like the Food Agriculture Organization that deal with this issue. But in my opinion, it's a breakthrough decision because for the first time, land tenure, which is very much up to the national sovereignty and up to the governments to decide how they want to deal with it, has been elevated to a global issue. And the parties in Côte d'Ivoire, in the COP in Côte d'Ivoire in May, will be discussing more on the issue of land tenure, and we hope that we will have another decision that will move the issue forward. On the issue of investment, all our work is related to also what Professor Lal mentioned, land degradation neutrality targets, that they are voluntary targets, but which basically have three parameters: to reverse, to avoid, and to restore, to reverse and avoid land degradation, and to restore land. What we are trying to do is to work with national governments. We're not working independently with different stakeholders, but with the governments themselves, to put forward bankable projects that can be funded by the big UN or non-UN organizations or even the development banks. So we are trying to assist our countries to put forward these projects that will have all of the aspects that could assist in their submission to funds or to banks for funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick follow-up question also coming in from the audience to you. Well, let's give it to you because, in fact, it involves a UN instrument. The question is this: how do we ensure that offset programs such as RED Plus from the UNFCCC do not encroach on indigenous rights?
Yeah, I think it is a very important issue. I think what we are trying to do, and all the UN conventions are trying to do, is to encourage the participation of indigenous people, of organizations like the International Land Coalition that advocate for these rights that people have. And I think that it's a very important part of our processes, even if we talk with parties, we talk with countries, we need to listen to the different perspectives. And I think this is a very important forum. Fora like that can give us this access, this direct access to the different perspectives that can be lost if we don't have a direct communication with them. So it is an issue. All decisions are being handled by countries and they are being taken internationally. But I think this fora can really give us a very, very direct perspective on these issues.
Thank you very much. Another audience question that I would like to pose to Madame Lomber. You talked about the need to ensure that soils are dedicated to agriculture rather than all being essentially encroached upon by industry. And this question is the following. How can we get to the point where fertile soils are no longer sealed for construction and transport projects? How do we ensure that the trade-off recognizes essentially the importance of soils, Madame Lomber?
Merci. Cela relève aussi de politiques nationales. Selon les pays et selon la taille des pays, mais aussi selon l'engagement des agriculteurs.
And the size of the country, but also depending on the commitment of farmers to protect soils, there are legal requirements
ce que l'on appelle l'artificialisation des sols, c'est-à-dire des sols qui quittent la fonction nourricière, l'agriculture, et qui sont bétonnés, qui sont artificialisés pour faire des usines,
in order to build streets or set up plants. It is not about stopping all development of this, but we must prevent these measures. There are countries where there is a rather careful use of soils. There is no policy decision. In France, we have the goal of zero sealing by 2040. So the issue is that there is soil that it cannot be used for agriculture, but we need to win back some part of our globe. Industrial areas, military areas, and farmers with green spaces and green spaces around cities. There are also rivers. These need to be protected. Under certain circumstances, urban agriculture can also be promoted. We need to do all that in order to produce food. There is a political willingness of the member states, for example, but it also depends on the different states and countries too. We need the cadastre, the land register, in order to secure tenure rights, especially for young farmers and women. It is of utmost importance. In France, too, it is difficult for women to acquire these rights. There is a lack of trust. So, as you can see, there are many elements at play in order to protect these soils.
If you also would like to weigh in on that point or just say a word or two, because we heard it emphasized also by our young farmer, Lucy Leva, about the role of women and how their tenure and their ability to put into place sustainable practices can be strengthened.
Yes, thank you. Very quickly, recognizing the women land rights is in one of our main pillars of work, and also our members. Now, of course, that as Madame Christine brought, realities are very different from different continents. So the situation of women regarding land tenure is very different from continent to continent, but we see in all of them a need to strengthen the role of women, the recognition of the role of women in the system of food production in general. No, but we still have today countries that don't even recognize the right of the women to own land. Many times the women, when they lose their husbands, they lose also their lands and they have to leave the land. And this is not a situation only in Africa or in Latin America, but in many other places. I would say that related to the registering, we need also to ensure that the land registering has the name of the women in there. Because many times women, they are deprived from accessing credit, and they have a situation, economical situation that is vulnerable in the family because they don't access credit, although they also work in the land. So those are the power imbalances that we need to face with the specific cases, not only of women, but also of youth, that needs also to be addressed when we are discussing securing land tenure.
Thank you very much. And now to Professor Lal, a couple of audience questions with the request for as brief an answer as possible, if you'd be so kind. The first one is how approaches like regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, and permaculture can be better promoted. Another question, shouldn't we stop regarding soils as a profit-oriented investment? And then finally, the question, is soil health universal? What are the best soil health measurements? And are these being taught to farmers? We touched briefly on information available to farmers at the top. So if you like, perhaps keep that part short. But the other questions, whichever points you want to pick up on, please.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I'll try to be short. Regenerative agriculture, yes. If the regenerative agriculture idea is while you're practicing farming, soil, natural resources are also being restored, then that's an excellent concept. There is no one regenerative practice that can be universally applicable. We have 300,000 known soil series. Therefore, it has to be very site-specific. But the basic concept is least disturbance, keep the ground cover, recycle as much as possible, and restore soil organic matter content. The last question was soil health measurement. Soil organic matter content is the heart of soil health. And therefore, if the soil organic matter content goes below a certain critical limit, biodiversity in the soil is gone, its other ecosystem services are also jeopardized. So soil carbon would be, soil organic carbon especially, organic matter content is the most critical part, and that must be brought up. Farmers should be compensated, encouraged to adopt regenerative agriculture practices which restore soil health and soil carbon. And that's where the compensation was very critical. I want to mention very quickly, we must reduce demand on food. That means reducing population. That means educating women and empowering women. So it is still possible to reduce population from 11.2 billion by 2100 to 8.5 billion if women are empowered and educated. We must produce more from less. And therefore, the diet becomes very critical. I agree, nobody can force what people should eat, but we must teach them what good diet means, good for people, their health, and good for land as well. We have 0.25 hectare per person, which is per capita healthy soil requirement to produce ecosystem services. We have 8 billion people now. That's about 2 billion hectare of land under agriculture. We right now have 5 billion hectares under agriculture. Think again. We can produce more from less and protect nature and also at the same time improve human life and dignity.
Thank you very much. And actually, let me take that question about profit-oriented investment also to Madame Lomber with the request for a very brief answer, if you'd be so kind. Again, the question is, should we stop regarding soils as a profit-oriented investment?
Soils
are first and foremost an element to produce foodstuffs. Agricultural activity is also an economic activity. Farmers are producing foodstuffs. It is about making money, sending your children to school. And this is also, therefore, an economic aspect, an economic activity, because foodstuffs end up in stores, in shops, in big shops. So production cannot be thought separately from profitability, but we need more sustainable approaches in the medium term. We need to make money as a farmer. That is a normal goal as a profession. They need to be able to send their children to school and so on. But there is also an approach regarding the 3 pillars of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental development. Profits are nothing negative per se. The question is, do we make a lot of profits or just about? And the future is about attaining good profits, positive profits. So we need to be realistic. We need to look at young farmers. When people decide to become young farmers, they want to feed their family and themselves, but they also want to trade using their soils, no matter what country they are based in, Asia, Africa, or the Americas, or in Europe, it doesn't matter. And after that, there are other persons who speculate, but that's a whole different story. You should know that in France, we try to get farmers a fair income because the income is not high enough regarding the work that farmers do. Take, for example, or remind yourselves of the fact that we have to take charge of cows every day, but the wages are not fair. It is about making this work economically.
Before we close this opening session, let me come back to our panel for a very brief closing statement, if I may. And I want to ask all of you to please complete the following statement in about 30 seconds, because we have very, very little time left on our clock. The sentence is this: my main priority and/or expectation for this forum, for the GFFA 2022, is... And I'll just go straight down the panel, beginning with Deputy Executive Secretary Beampilly, please.
To link the global with the local and to be exposed to the different perspectives like the ones that we have heard today.
Thank you very much. And next up, Professor Lau, your main priority for the GFFA 2022.
Empower farmers to translate science into action.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to ask Madame Lomber to address the same question, if you would.
Associer les agriculteurs, grands, moyens, petits, aux décisions qui concerneront le sol et former les agriculteurs pour une compréhension globale des situations.
And a global understanding
is that land can be referred during these discussions not only as a natural resource, but also as the source of life and livelihoods for the people.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much to all of you for being with us, for sharing your very valuable insights that will, in fact, inform our ongoing discussions for the remainder of the week. And I would also like to say to all of those who have been with us in the live stream, thank you so much for your attention and also for your contributions, for the excellent questions and comments that you have sent to us. And dear ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned earlier, there is a lot to look forward to over the next couple of days, from additional high-level expert discussions to our Science Slam innovation pitches, and then at the end of the week, it will all round off in a high-level ministerial meeting, as you heard from our host at the beginning. And the opening part of this ministerial on Friday will also be open to the public, so you are welcome to join us for that. I'd also like to thank our organizers for making this truly, truly thought-provoking discussion possible. And my gratitude also, of course, does go to all of those behind the scenes who have worked so hard to make this online event as smooth as it has been. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that our paths will cross again in future. And until then, stay healthy, stay safe. Goodbye.